Howdy, Immortallium here. Slightly different angle than the previous years, simply because, a bit of shelf rearranging. But anyway, welcome to my third annual Manga Marathon, 24 hours. 3 years, by God, that really makes me feel a little on the old side, I guess, with YouTube almost. But anyway, third year of a Manga Marathon, and if you guys aren't familiar with my Manga Marathon, I'm sure most of you are, but if you've clicked on this video without being aware of what this is all about, I'll include a link to the description video below, so check that out first, and then you can go on with this. Just to point out, first of all, that I usually do one 24-hour session, just go straight through. But I haven't been sleeping that well recently, so I've actually decided to cut it down to 2 12-hour ones. I usually prefer to do 24-hour ones. I think they're more interesting, but I'm just not able to, handle it. If I do 24 hours, I'm going to be struggling to stay awake. I'm not going to be enjoying what I'm reading. So, that is a problem. So anyway, that's my current plan in regards to that. Let's get started. As usual, I'll be using my stopwatch to time how long I've been going on. I don't think you can actually see that, but it's at 0 right now, so I'll just start it. There we go. Started. And first off, I'm going to start off with my category for manga I have no interest in. Now, for those of you who are unaware of what it is, there's going to be a bit of shock, but what it is, manga I have no interest in, Vinland Saga. Now, in regards to Vinland Saga, I know it's a really well-received series and, very popular, and there's a lot of, really, hardcore fans of it, particularly now that it faces possible cancellation in English due to lack of sales. It'll be interesting to see if Kodansha, decide to continue on or not. But my issue with Vinland Saga is that too many people tried to force me to read it, which put me off it. I was interested in it before, not majorly interested. I wasn't like, oh god, I'm really excited to read Vinland Saga, but I was like, it's gotten good reviews, I want to check it out. But as soon as, many people, when they heard that announcement, that Kodansha announcement, they're like, you have to pick up Vinland Saga, if not, it might get cancelled. I was thinking to myself, I don't need to pick up anything. I could just, skip that if I want. I wasn't even that interested in it in the first place. So that put me off. I would have actually picked this up earlier if people hadn't been trying to force me to read it. But anyway, I was thinking to myself, when I was trying to think of manga I have no interest in, I was thinking, what's a good manga that I have no interest in? And I decided probably Vinland Saga. This is a decent excuse to actually finally read it, because I wasn't going to get around to it otherwise. And I'll have to see if my opinion changes. I'm going to return in a little while. Actually, one thing I might show you quickly is the time. The time is approximately 11:03. Not sure if you can actually see that. But that's the current time. So I'll check back once I've read this. This is a 2-in-1, so it'll take me a little while to read. But, I'll come back with my opinion. So I just finished reading Vinland Saga. And it's an interesting little read. So basically the plot of Vinland Saga, it opens up with a battle in the Frank Kingdoms in the 11th century, which would be, the 1000 ADs. And basically it's a battle between 2 Frank tribes, and a group of Norsemen, or Vikings, about 100 strong, decide, we'll offer ourselves to the attacking side, and we'll take the loot to be gained inside the city. And they send a boy with them, a 16-year-old boy called Thorfinn, to negotiate with the attacking Franks. And, he says to them, we'll offer our aid. The Frank lord accepts the aid. They attack the settlement, and I guess it'll be spoiler territory from there on. So what did I think of Vinland Saga? It's an interesting read. The art is pretty nice. It's by Makoto Yukimura, who previously my only experience with him has been actually the anime Planetes, which was an adaptation of an earlier work that he did. the Planet manga, which is getting a re-release by Dark Horse. I'm quite interested in that because I like the anime a lot. So the art's quite nice. It's shonen, very shonen, which is something I wasn't expecting. I knew that Vinland Saga started out as a shonen series and was published weekly, but then Makoto, he decided to swap over to a seinen magazine because he couldn't handle the stress and the workload of weekly releases. So then it became a seinen. I assumed that he had started it over again in the seinen magazine, but it appears that he must have, just decided to keep on going in the seinen magazine. So as far as I can tell, it appears that all of this is shonen, is the shonen aspect. Maybe a little bit near the end might have changed, I'm not sure. I doubt it. But as far as I can tell, it's all shonen. So it was a weekly release that I could see there, and if that's the case, the art is superb for a weekly release. It is somewhat tamer than I was expected in terms of content. There was some cursing involved, but I'm sure that was the translators just adding in because they knew that it was going to become a seinen series, so they kind of wanted to set up the tone onwards. But even so, it is like a gory series. During the beginning of the siege, we see stuff like arrows being taken out of enemy bodies and eyeballs being on them. So that isn't to say it's a very tame series. It's just tamer than I was expecting. Now, in regards to the actual story itself, Thorfinn, who is clearly the lead character, is potentially interesting. He has a tragic background and definitely a strong motive. He also leads a very interesting kind of modern life. When I say modern life, the most of this 2-in-1, which is over 40 pages long, most of it, I'd say a good 300 pages, is actually his background. It's set 10 years before the actual current story. So he's definitely got an interesting motive and leads a very, kind of interesting life. But we don't really see that much of it in this volume. It's mainly focused on his background. And I was a bit disappointed in that. Definitely there's some very interesting information to be gained from the background. But I just wish that, they had set up a bit more time, us getting to know the modern Thorfinn more, getting more interested in him as a character in that period, and then going back. And plus another thing was, it wasn't a spoiler exactly. They mentioned about Thorfinn's father, and because of that, the actual flashback didn't have as much tension as I was expecting it would. I know that is definitely an actual technique, like knowing how the story ends, but building up to, how it ends, being able to surprise people. Definitely, there were definitely things that I wasn't expecting in that flashback. So interesting. I guess I was expecting a bit more on the modern side in terms of the story. So overall, what do I think of Vinland Saga? It's interesting. Whether I'll continue it on, I'll definitely consider it. Adam, Archangel Manga, he told me that it wasn't until like the 4th 2-in-1 that he really got hooked on it. He said it was good up to that point, but then like it was number 4 that really hooked him on because some big character moment happened in it. I mean, that's quite a commitment. I mean, that's another 400, no, not even, like another 800 pages of reading before you get to the volume that's meant to be like the real turning point in quality, according to Adam. So I'll just have to see if I feel like it. It definitely wasn't a bad read. It was interesting. And there's some very nice things that they do in terms of the extras. There's some very good translation notes by the translators explaining a lot of the Viking terms like Normandy, the Frankish Kingdom, Tyr, Jormungand, the Thing, which I thought was very interesting because the Thing is actually also present in Game of Thrones with the Ironborn, which are clearly based on Vikings. So I thought that was very interesting. There's a bonus story which is called For Our Farewell is Near, based during the Bakumatsu in Japan. There's only a couple of pages. I would say maybe 8 pages of it. and it's a part 1, so we'll be continuing the second part. Interesting little addition. It was an interesting thing. It was too short, I thought, to actually kind of hook me because it was only 8 pages long. One of the things I enjoyed most, well, when I say in terms of extras, is this bit here, Thorfinn's Travels, which basically it's a map of Europe. And it just basically, explains like the locations that all the bits were set in during that volume. And I could kind of guess, in general, I'm quite into history, so I could kind of guess a lot of things. Like I was thinking, at one point when they get back to Denmark, I was thinking based on the fact they're coming from the Frankish kingdoms, which was France, is probably on the the western coast of Denmark, which I was right. But there were some other bits, like there was a bit called Jomsborg, or Jomsburg, I guess it was called, which is actually pretty much, it's either modern day Germany or northern Poland. But I actually didn't know that, so I thought that was a pretty interesting little addition. So overall, the Thorfinn's Travels I thought was very interesting. A really nice, interesting addition to the extras. And then you get a bit of Four Koma, the first Four Koma being based on Thorfinn's sister, and the second Four Koma actually being based on the research trip that Makoto went to Iceland in order to just do a bit of research. Some interesting little bits of information there. Overall, and I guess in regards to Kodansha's treatment of this, the paper quality is very nice. It's in a bigger trim size than the, like the standard kind of releases from like Viz or Yen Press. So it's a bigger trim size, which is nice because, as I say, the art is very nice. I'm sure it'll improve once it goes to, I believe it was a monthly, once it got to a seinen. But even as a weekly shonen, it's still a very nice looking series. But I've got to say that the hardcover is probably the lowest quality hardcover I own. I have a good few hardcovers. I have the Gundams, of course. I have Bride Story, High School of the Dead, Heart of Thomas, a bunch of hardcovers. And I gotta say that this is definitely the lowest quality. It feels very flimsy. Actually somewhat uncomfortable on the hands. Overall, I'm not impressed with the actual hardcover. I was impressed with the paper quality. Very nice whites. So overall, I'll consider going on. It's definitely. I'm just trying to recall what. Yeah, okay. So I can say it's the best manga that I had no interest in the categories, because the previous ones was Fake, and in last year was Seven Deadly Sins. This is better than both of them, I will say. So I'm actually considering continuing this on and seeing how it goes. Now, I'll be going to have my lunch now, and when I come back, I'll decide on what I'm going to read. I'm considering whether to bring you down just to show what I'll explain it here. I gotta have burgers, a pancake, and a bit of chipsticks. I'm just gonna watch an episode of Star Wars Rebels I watched last night. Once I've done that, I'll come back and I'll get on to the next series. Back from the lunch, and one thing I actually realized while I was down there was that I didn't mention what time it is when I was last up here. So reading Vinland Saga actually took me 2 hours 50 minutes, which is a little longer than I was expecting, but with the translation notes and the nice artwork, that's acceptable. Currently, it is about 2:30. So 3 hours 30 minutes have passed. So next up, I'm thinking I'm gonna go with the Josei title. The Josei title here being In Clothes Called Fat by Miyoko Ano. This is something I've been wanting to check out for a while. Miyoko Ano, I've read 2 other works from her, Sakuran and Insufficient Direction. Interestingly, Insufficient Direction I think was my Josei title for last year as well. Anyway. So I've heard the premise of it, and it sounds very interesting. Very different looking artistically from Insufficient Direction. It's more in line artistically with Sakuran. That'll be interesting to check out. So I'll get back to you once I've read this. This is only, how many pages? It's much shorter than the Vinland Saga. About 250. So almost half of Vinland Saga. So I finished In Clothes Called Fat. Just to tell you, the time is almost 4. So about 5 hours have passed since I began. So this took me not quite 2 hours, but close enough. And boy, my brain is like recovering from this. That's not to say it was bad. It was very good. I really thought this was a fantastic work. It's quite a it's quite overwhelming. I guess let me just describe to you what the story is like first. Basically, the lead character is called Noko, And Noko works as an office worker. She's also quite overweight. Apparently, considering at the beginning of the story, one of the people say that has she gained weight recently? She used to be so pleasantly plump. Apparently it's a recent thing. And she suffered, I don't know what the term is, but she suffers from that mental disorder where whenever she gets stressed, she moves on to eating food in order to act as a stress reliever. Basically, she is going out with a guy called Saito. And Saito is, he's into her, of course, but he also likes manipulating her. He likes the fact that she's weak and has very little confidence. And at the same time, she's having a lot of trouble with a co-worker. I believe her name was Mayumi. Mayumi is this kind of office hottie. And she's constantly, like, at first it seems like Mayumi is a good friend to her, but after a while it becomes clear that Mayumi is using her, Noko, as a way to increase her own self-confidence. Basically saying, oh, I'm so beautiful because look at this fat girl. And that's how the story progresses. It steadily, Noko becomes more and more mentally unstable. She starts getting to those really uncomfortable situations where she makes social situations more and more uncomfortable because of her disorder, and because of that it drives her on to eat even more. Really uncomfortable manga to read. And another thing I want to point out is that the characters are so venomous. I mean, Saito, her boss, Mayumi, as I said. There's most of the characters in this are downright unlikable, and even ones who actually care about Noko's well-being are only using it to kind of build up their own self-confidence. There's no one who cares purely about Noko. They want to use her one way or another. And because of that, it's a little uncomfortable to read, but in the end I did enjoy this. I thought the character development of Noko was really interesting. She starts out so pathetic, and she gets more pathetic, and there's no real way to phrase it without spoiling anything, but she develops into a really interesting character, a character that you could really write a paper on, I think. Now there are some issues with it, a couple of, I don't want to call coincidences. Basically there's a character in this, I should say, and because of that character she gets access to stuff that you wouldn't expect her to be able to access. And I always think that in stories like that, they're a bit of a crutch. Characters who allow a person to be able to do something that a normal person wouldn't be able to do. Now, whether that's through power, through money, etc., etc., I always think that is a crutch in storytelling. Particularly storytelling that's meant to be realistic. Like, for example, her complete panic about her weight. So I do think that that's a bit of an issue. But overall, I thought really, really interesting ideas. The art in the story is kind of like Sakura, so nothing like Insufficient Direction, which was kind of a super deformed character. In this, it was the more realistic, angular looking characters that we're seeing in Sakura. And the artwork, like, it's relatively simple, particularly in comparison to Vinland Saga, which I read. Vinland Saga had way more complicated backgrounds, more detail on the characters, but still I found the actual character designs appealing, and the overall artwork is very appealing. So really, really interesting work. I enjoyed it. I'm still processing as to why I enjoyed it, because it's so dark and goes to really bad places. Most of the characters, as I said, are unlikable, but for whatever reason I thought I got up after that seat afterwards, and I was thinking to myself, that was a really interesting read, and the time flew by. I wasn't actually like looking at anything. Vinland Saga, that's not to say I didn't enjoy Vinland Saga, but with Vinland Saga, like, sometimes I'd kind of look up at the clock and go, okay, so this much time has passed. But with it, Enclosed Called Fat, I was just like all the way through. So yeah, I can definitely recommend Enclosed Called Fat. Where it'll be, I can definitely say that when I do that top 5 Jose, I'm not sure when I do that. I think it might be a bit too soon to try to do another list of that, but that'll definitely get on there, particularly with the ending of Bunny Drop, probably knocking Bunny Drop off that list. But yeah, very interesting. Now, afterwards, I'm just trying to check the time. I'm going to be going until 11, I believe. Yes, until 11. So I have 7 more hours, in which case I have time for a good bit of stuff more. I'm wondering how much more I'll get. The next one I'm thinking of doing is Alabaster, the Osamu Tezuka category. Basically, Alabaster, just to explain, I got this from a Kickstarter, and I had funded. When did I? Was it May? Was that when that Kickstarter was running, or was it March? God, I can't recall, but it was in the first half of the year anyway. Last year, I should say. Now I'm still processing the fact it's 2016. But anyway, I participated in that Kickstarter, and it arrived recently enough. I think it was last month. When I got it, I was thinking to myself, God, this is the perfect Tezuka title to read for the Manga Marathon. Because I've been looking forward to reading Alabaster for ages. This is about how many pages long? I think it'd be 500 pages added together. Okay, the second one is only 220, and the first one is... yeah, so it's pretty much about 480 pages, which is pretty close to what Vinland Saga was. And also the other thing I want to point out is that the paper quality in this is far greater than the previous Kickstarter titles. Now, how much that'll influence my reading, I don't know. But I've just flicked through it, and like the whites are fantastic, so I'm looking forward to reading this. And this is meant to be going from one dark work to another dark work. Alabaster was written around Tezuka's darkest time in his career. His not his manga company, his anime company, I believe it was called Mushi Productions, had gone bankrupt. And he was struggling to remain popular. Basically, the Gekiga movement had started 10 years before, and it was really getting into full swing. There was a lot of dark, adult, edgy titles, and people were starting to reject Tezuka, particularly the more cartoony nature of his work. He wrote Alabaster, and in fact, there's a famous story. He was definitely writing Alabaster at the time. Whether or not he was actually writing Alabaster as the incident occurred, I'm not sure. But there was a time when a bunch of debt collectors actually visited his house, and he told them to just wait in this room, in the front living room, and he went to finish off drawing his manga while the debt collectors were in the room just like across from him. He was writing Alabaster around that time, but I don't know if that was actually the title he was actually drawing at the moment. But that's just to kind of push how dark a place Tezuka was in. He was real dark. A lot of people didn't react very positively to Alabaster at the time because of how dark it was. It was very un-Tezuka. Now when we think of Tezuka, we think of like a lot of his seinen titles, you know, Mu, Message to Adolf, Ayako, Book of Human Insects, you know, lots of really dark titles. But at the time of Alabaster, he was known for, you know, very enjoyable, entertaining, cartoony, almost kids books. So Alabaster just came out of nowhere and really like freaked people out. Not only that, there's a character called Rock, who is usually a heroic character in many other Tezuka titles. But in Alabaster, he's meant to be like a really vile monster of a character, which a lot of people didn't like because, as I said, he had been so heroic before. So I'll get back to you on that. It's only actually been a few minutes, well, I'm going to say a few minutes, maybe like 10 minutes after the last video entry. I haven't actually started Alabaster yet, but I was about to start Alabaster when I heard my sister coming back home. She had been in Edinburgh. So I went downstairs, so, yo, hi, and she was like, oh, I got you a souvenir, and I was like, oh, interesting, what kind of souvenir could that be? Expecting, you know, a little, I don't know, like an Edinburgh medallion or something like that. But what she get me? She got me a little Sage Mode Naruto plushie, which is quite cute. She also got me Pocky, which I've been meaning to try for a long time. I'm not sure if I've ever I might have had one Pocky in the past. It was strawberry flavoured though, and what she bought me was chocolate flavoured. I'm not keen on strawberry, see, so I wasn't keen on the Pocky I tried before. So it'll be really interesting to try the chocolate one. But I just thought, just before I start Alabaster, it was worth mentioning this little cute Naruto plushie. I don't usually buy, in fact, I don't have any plushies. I don't buy too much merchandise. I buy a bit of merchandise, of course, but I usually like to save my money for other stuff. But I'm very happy to have this little chap. So I'm back after reading Alabaster. It is currently 7:15, about 8 hours 15 minutes in, and as I just said a moment ago, finished Alabaster. Okay, so Alabaster, let's start off with what it's about. So basically it opens up with this guy, a kind of translucent guy, taking this guy into a house and telling him his story. His name, the translucent guy, is James Block, and he is a former Olympic athlete, a winner of several golden medals, and he just happens to be black. And he comes across this woman, a very famous woman, called Suzanne Ross, and he falls in love with her. They go out for a year, and he proposes to her, and she says, you know, I was only going out with you because you are an Olympic athlete. And it was like, have you just been playing with me this whole time? And she's like, of course, I can't marry you, you're black. And that sends him into a frenzy, understandably. Bit too much though. He goes after her, he gets handled by some men who call him some very unpolitically correct terms. He makes his way to a car, he starts driving, but he didn't learn how to drive, so he accidentally runs into a person, killing them. And so he gets sentenced to manslaughter for 5 years. Now, while he's in jail, he comes across an inmate who is a scientist, and he is there because he invented this gun, this invisibility gun. And James goes to the laboratory after he gets out, finds the gun, shoots it on himself, but due to the pain, jumps out of it afterwards. Well, midway through, I should say. And so he is only like partially invisible. Like his skin is invisible. It claims that his bones are visible, but I don't really see his bones. It's more like the veins and arteries and everything that you can see. But anyway, he comes back to Suzanne Ross' place in order to get revenge on her, and that's kind of how the story opens up. Now, if I'm going to confess, I enjoyed the story most in its first few chapters. I thought the first chapter, along with the other couple, like number 2 and 3, were the best. I enjoyed them a great deal. I'm going to confess, I have quite a sucker for revenge stories, so you know, that really kind of got me exactly excited. But as the story progresses, I feel that it steadily becomes a bit more convoluted, I guess is the word I should say, to the point where by the second volume, it feels like it's a bit all over the place in terms of character development, in terms of its themes. That's not to say it's a bad work, just that I think that it's a little on the messy side. I definitely enjoyed it. I think for one, Tezuka's artwork is fantastic in this. His panel arrangement is absolutely fantastic. And also I was really treated to, near the end of the second volume, there was actually a double boom page, you know, like 2 full pages devoted to his artwork, which I was just like, oh wow, you know, that's amazing. But I will say that it is quite a sloppy work as it progresses. Now, that's not to say that, you know, it has interesting ideas, and I will say that I enjoyed it, but not to the extent that I enjoyed the first few chapters. So that is a shame. One thing I do have to admit, I was chuckling away to myself just a moment ago. Once I finished the actual Alabaster, there's actually a 2-page afterword that Osamu Tezuka did for the Complete Works release of Alabaster. And he says that when the Complete Works thing came up, he was immediately thinking about works that he didn't want to get re-released. And he named a couple of them, but he also said Alabaster, the book I was holding, was one of them. And he said that he was trying to capture, you know, that sense of dark adventure that many other works, in particular a author that he mentioned was, I believe I know his name, Ranpo Edogawa. I think he's a Japanese crime author. But anyway, so he said he wanted to kind of go for that style, but he found that in the end he created a work that was overwhelmingly nihilistic. And in fact, he actually confesses that he hates every single character he created in this series, which I think is very harsh. I mean, sure, a lot of them are very dark. Rock, I think, was like pure evil in this. And I liked Alabaster himself near the beginning. I do think that as the series progressed, he lost his way, became overcome with, you know, pure hate and vengeance, which pushed me away. But that's not to say that I hated every character in it. You know, there were some other characters as well. Ami was a very interesting character. There's another really good character called Gen, who started out as a kind of a hooligan character, taking advantage of Ami. And as the story progressed, we steadily found that he wasn't as bad as he was cracked up to be. So, to say that Tezuka, yeah, okay, that's fair enough. Tezuka hated all the characters in it, but I didn't hate all the characters in it. So overall, my basic point about Alabaster is that I think it's really interesting, particularly from, you know, Tezuka's mental state at that point. And I do think that has a lot of interesting ideas. I think the first few chapters are fantastic. But it does get sloppy, admittedly, and so it's not as good as I was hoping it would be. You know, I had quite a bit of expectation for this series, but in the end, you know, I was still happy to read it. You know, I'm still very happy to have read it. A great piece to put into my collection. So anyway, I'm going to be heading off to have dinner, and I'll be back to see you guys in a little bit. So I'm back from dinner, and actually a thought came into my head when I was eating dinner, which was, maybe some people might actually say, hey, you're not having a proper 24-hour manga marathon with the 212s, because you're spending like some time, you know, having meals. I'm sure that there won't be many people, if any, that'll say that, but I just want to cover it just in case. It is 40 minutes, and sure, theoretically I can eat while reading manga, but I don't want to risk getting any like grease or any like food or anything all over my manga. Like that I don't know. That's just, to me, is kind of gross. But anyway, it is almost 9 hours in now, and I'm suspecting that this will be the last that I'll be reading. Now, if there's a little bit of time at the end, I'm not exactly sure what I'll be doing. Well, when I say last, I should say of this 12-hour, obviously. So basically, my next read, and last for this 12-hour session, will be A Silent Voice, the first 2 volumes for the category of shonen that is not about fighting. Which I think, it's a brand new category. Now, A Silent Voice, I don't know too much about it. I know the basic premise, and I also know that it's been ridiculously well received in Japan, in America. It seems wherever it goes, positivity follows. I don't think I've actually ever heard anyone say anything bad about it. I was considering picking up all 7 at once all 7 got released. But when I put in that category of, you know, shonen that isn't about fighting, I was kind of thinking to myself, what would be a good shonen to do? And, you know, there were several that popped in my mind, you know, like Slam Dunk, and I'm sure there was one other one I was considering as well. But in the end, I decided on A Silent Voice, simply because it's brand new, and is also only going to be 7 volumes long. When I say brand new, what I mean is I want to help ensure that the series gets like a full English release. I'm not sure how it's selling. I'm hoping it's selling well, considering its positivity, but you never know. So anyway, I'm going to give this a go and see what I think. It is 2 volumes long, so I'm not sure how long it will take me to read. But if it's anything like Alabaster or Vinland Saga, it'll take me 3 hours. So that'll bring me pretty much right to the end of this first 12-hour session. It is about 20 to 11, according to the clock, I should say, over there. And it is about 11 hours, 37 minutes since I began the marathon. And I finished the first 2 volumes of Silent Voice. What is the premise of the series? The premise of the series is that there's this boy called Shoya Ishida and a girl, Shoko Nishimiya, sorry. And basically, she is a transfer student. She goes to a school, and he ends up becoming her bully. Like, he bullies her because she's deaf. And also, at the very beginning of the first chapter, it turns out, like, they meet several years later. Again, like, now that they're in high school. The first time was when they were in elementary school. And now they come across each other in high school. Not in the same high school, but, you know, while they're in high school. And I've been kind of thinking for a little while. Like, I didn't immediately go on to making this kind of vlog. I actually spent like a minute or two trying to process my opinions on this. Because it's very hard to describe. I don't want you guys to think that I'm going to be negative on it, because, well, I guess I'll be slightly negative. Okay, let's start off with just my honest feelings, okay? So, this first volume, I cannot say that I enjoyed this first volume. I thought it was well done, but the bullying is intense. The lead character, Shoya, is very unlikable in this volume. Very unredeemable. And there's another thing in it that annoyed me in regards... happens like midway through the volume, so it'd be kind of spoiler territory, so I can't really point it out, but it annoyed me too. If you guys are fans of A Sound Voice, you could just contact me privately through something like, I don't know, YouTube messaging or something. You can ask me what it was, and I can explain there what it was. But in general, I thought it was a decently done volume, but I can't say I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the second volume a lot more, which is where he's trying to redeem himself for how he treated her. And while I do question how she reacts to him immediately, I do think that overall it was a much more enjoyable volume. And it was this volume that kind of made me think I can be comfortable going on with the series if it's kind of like this. Because that first volume is kind of like the bad past that the two share. And now, in the second volume, they're starting to kind of try to get beyond that, which is a much more comfortable experience for me. I know it's meant to be uncomfortable. Yeah, I'm not really sure how to say this. I don't want anyone to think that this is me criticizing it. This is just, like, it actually provoked... let me just tell you this. It's a good sign that it provoked a very strong emotional response from me for the first volume. Because I noticed that my heart was actually beating faster. My muscles were tensing up slightly, so clearly I was having a strong emotional response to it, and that's a clear sign that the story is being done right, because, if it was badly done, I wouldn't have an emotional response, I wouldn't care. It's just that it was uncomfortable for me. But the second volume, definitely, I enjoyed it more. I wouldn't say the second volume was flawless. Her reaction was kind of, I don't know, I'm wondering, would a character really have done that in her situation? But who knows? Life is strange in fiction, right? So overall, I'm definitely considering continuing on with it. It'll only be 7 volumes in total, and the second volume I did enjoy, so I'm definitely thinking about continuing it on. So that's my opinion on that. So that's my first 12-hour session done, and I just want to say that I'm glad that I've actually chosen to split this up into 2 12-hour sessions, because I'm tired. I'm quite tired. Like last year, I was pretty tired when I did the 24-hour thing, but it wasn't bad. And the year before that, I didn't have a problem really with it, with the 24-hour thing. This year though, even 12 hours, I'm already kind of tired. I'm glad I've split this up into 2 12-hour things. So I'm back again. This is a bit more than 12 hours. 13 hours essentially after the last entry. And something that I think is funny, just before I start this off again, something that I think is kind of amusing is that my brain is still processing that first volume of A Sound Voice. Second volume, no problem, but that first volume, I'm still thinking about that bit in the middle and trying to process it. It would definitely help if I could talk to some people about it. So I'm going to start the stopwatch again. There we go. And I only have two categories left. The first category I'm going to be doing is manga started before 1990. And for this I chose to continue on with a particular author that I meant to continue on when I started collecting manga. Basically, I don't know, maybe a year into when I started collecting manga, I kind of made a decision to myself that I would try to collect as much Tezuka, Clamp, and Shiro Masamune as I possibly could. Osamu Tezuka, clearly you guys know that I've collected a lot of Osamu Tezuka. Not everything that's in English, but, you know, a good chunk of it. So, I'm making great progress on that. Clamp is kind of on a middle kind of thing. I've gotten a decent amount of Clamp, but not nearly as much as has been released in English. I haven't made it a big priority. And then something that I kind of completely left by the wayside was Shiro Masamune, who, even though I've seen much of the anime based off of his works, the only manga from him I've read up to this point is Black Magic, which was his debut manga, which I wasn't too impressed with. Maybe that was a contributing factor. But anyway, the point now is that for next category, it is going to be Dominion. Now, Dominion, I know, was made into a popular OVA that was released in English. Well, Japanese first and then English, of course. And also, it's interesting to note that Dominion would only have been his third work. I believe he started and finished it during the serialization of Appleseed. So he did Black Magic, then he moved on to Appleseed. And I think during Appleseed, he created Dominion. So I think that that's the next logical step to go, particularly considering the fact that it's a bit harder these days to get my hands on Appleseed. And also, the other reason that I decided to wait until the beginning of this, rather than read it last night, is because of the fact that it's actually somewhat wordy. Which, you know, I mean, I guess I just needed like my full brain cells in order to be able to deal with that. So anyway, I'll get back to you and I'll tell you what I think of Dominion. First thing you'll notice is that the lighting looks different. And the reason for that is the power's gone out in this house. So there's no electricity at all in this house. I'm wondering what I'm going to be doing for lunch. But anyway, so I finished Dominion. And what do I think of Dominion? Well, it's an interesting one to compare to Black Magic. I think Dominion does certain things better than Black Magic, but also I think it does some things that are worse than Black Magic. Let's start off with what the actual story is. So basically, it's set in the future. The Earth is pretty much completely contaminated. There's actual bacteria in the air that is toxic to humans. And so you have these, you know, bioconstructed cities, and it's safe to be in there breathing, but whenever you go into an area not under that area, you have to put on this mask in order to be able to breathe. That kind of makes me think almost of Nausicaa, in a sense. But anyway, our lead character is Leona, this girl here, and she's part of the police tank force. Basically, they're in charge of, you know, keeping order in the city. The city is very unstable. There's a lot of crime. There's a lot of protesting, and there's a criminal on the loose called Buaku. And Buaku is a very dangerous criminal. He runs a lot of different organizations in order to be able to bring down the government, etc., etc. And he has the assistance of these two cat women, which I noticed the two cat women were always on the cover for the OVAs of Dominion. Now, at the same time, they come across this this mysterious girl she has wings. She seems to be naked most of the time, and she has this amazing ability to convert the toxic air into proper oxygen. So that's how that story begins. Now, first thing I will say, I'll start off with the positives. I like the premise, and the art in this is absolutely fantastic. I think Shiro Masamune does some amazing action sequences as well. Really dynamic. Another point I should bring up is something that surprised me is that this is similar-ish in many ways to Pat Labor. She seems to have a gigantic crush on her tank, which she has named Bonaparte, in the same way that one from Pat Labor seemed to have a giant crush on her tank, but well, her suit, I should say, by the name of Alphonse. I'm not exactly sure which came first, Dominion or Pat Labor, but I find it hard to imagine that they didn't influence each other. Like that the first one that came out could not have influenced the other one. That's a very hard thing to imagine because they're so similar in many regards. But from there on, I've got to say that I wasn't too keen on the actual style of the series. There's a lot of randomness, is what I'm going to point out in this series, and it's something that I think it really is different from Shirow Masamune's early works to his newer works. Well, newer works in quotations, of course, because he doesn't really do newer works now. What I mean is by newer works is stuff he did in the 90s. By that I mean he tries to put in a lot of slapstick comedy and lots of, oh, look at how crazy this sequence is, because quite often the tank is going into like random places, smashing walls, and the citizens are like staring at those blank faces and the overly large eyes. And to me that wasn't particularly funny. Yeah, it was kind of amusing at the beginning, but when it's kind of relying on that source of humor for almost the entire manga, I got tired of it real quickly. Another source of humor that I found quite tiresome was at the beginning there was like there's sequences written in the background like by Appleseed number 3 had lots of nudity and violence, and I thought, hey, that's kind of funny. But when you see that being repeated over and over by Black Magic, by Appleseed throughout the whole the back sequences, it gets very tiresome. I know it happens at least 3 times or more, which by that point I was very tired of the joke. To me it felt like marketing, like bad marketing. And characters-wise, we didn't really get to know too many of the characters. We have these very long explanations about characters. A good example being here, the Dominion file number 1, which has a big amount of background, a lot of random characters, as well as the characters we actually do follow. And then we also have Dominion files based on other characters, like for example the Chief, for instance. Like we find out there that the Chief is pretty much the only Caucasian in the forest. That everyone else is, there's very few pure Japanese as well in the forest. Most of them are like mixed race. So some interesting ideas from there. But overall, a lot of that information turned out to be very irrelevant. So from that perspective, didn't really add much to the story. I guess as well, it feels very inconclusive, the main story, which was a similar issue that I aimed at Black Magic. It kind of just ended. And by that, I mean it ended with chapter, I believe it was 3. Chapter 4 is pretty much a completely standalone story. Which kind of surprised me, because if it had said side story, I'd be fine with that. But it specifically says Dominion Part 4. Now it says at the end, Dominion Volume 1 End, which, if I recall correctly, the second volume of Dominion didn't come out for ages, so I don't know exactly how that worked. But my general point with this series, with this volume in particular, is that I like the art, I like the actual action sequence. I think they were very well done. I liked the premise, as well as the character designs were great. But I just think it's a very messily written story with a lot of very weak humor, and I don't know, I just wasn't that into it overall. I'm glad to have read it, but I wasn't that keen on it overall. What I'd like to do is, I can think of a couple of people that I speak to online who are into Shirow Masamune quite heavily and probably have read a lot of his works. So I'd like to ask them about, the style of his manga in general, how much of this, slapstick humor is in so much of them. Because the first 2, like this in particular, but I do think that Black Magic had a good bit of that as well in it. I'm not keen on his style of humor. I'm keen on his ideas and his action sequences and his art, not the humor, which he was focusing on so heavily in this. So I'll have to ask them about, what his manga is like in general. Now, the other thing to point out, which I thought was really nice, was there was a section called The Mini Tank, which is a very long essay written by Shirow Masamune. Like this much writing. There's like 5 pages of heavy writing, along with some artwork, just snarky comments from the characters. but it's mainly writing, and it's explaining about, you know, tanks in general. Like when the first tank was brought in, what could people have thought when they first saw them, what was it like to be in a tank, and how inefficient tanks have become, you know, like the anti-tank helicopters are extremely effective at bringing down tanks. Now, keep in mind, this was written a very long time ago. And it's a very long time ago, I mean in the 80s. So what I mean by that is he's talking about the Soviet Union and all that. What the Soviet Union has just brought in, which, you know, is very funny because the Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore. So it's a very interesting read. I will say that I enjoyed it more than the actual manga. Overall, I found that very informative. It was a nice little extra. Beyond that, yeah, I'm happy to have read it, but I wasn't keen on it. I wouldn't recommend it, to be honest. So yeah, that's that done. Now I need to actually figure out what I'm going to do for lunch now that the power's out. About almost 3 hours have passed since I started that. You might be wondering, it's only 200 pages. How come it took you 3 hours? Lots of writing in that. It was very word heavy. So yeah, I'll have to figure out how lunch is going to be done, and then I'll get back to you on my last category, which will be favorite manga. Well, that took longer than I expected. Last time you saw me, the power had gone out, and it's back on now, but it took a while to come back on, and during that time I needed to do jobs around the house and help around while the power was out. So by the time I've come back, it's actually about 4:30 now, which gives me 7.5 hours to do the last category, which is my favorite manga. Now, I was thinking about this favorite manga. I did a volume of With the Light one of the years. I think it might have been the first year. I did Ayako that year as well for the Tezuka category. Then the next year I think it was Death Note, which I did. So I was trying to think, okay, so those are generally the ones I consider my favorites. But there was also one other which I also included in my favorites. So I guess that'll be the one. I'm not sure what I'll do next year. But what it is a series I'm sure I've talked about a good bit. Girlfriends. Now this is essentially 5 volumes long. I think each one is about 2.5 volumes. So whether or not I'll be able to read all of it, I'm not sure. 5 volumes, 7.5 hours? Maybe? I'll give it a go. Even if I can't read it all in 7.5 hours, I'll still be able to you know, talk about it because I've read it before, and I'll count it with me doing the favorite manga category anyway. So that's my plan now. So who knows what time it'll be by the time I get back on my last report. But yeah, Girlfriends, really enjoyable series. I guess just before I leave off, basically what is Girlfriends about? Girlfriends is about these 2 girls. Marie and Aiko, I believe, are the names. And no, Marie and Ako, I remember now. Not Aiko, Ako. And basically they become friends at the beginning, and for a while it's just like normal friendship, they're hanging out, etc, etc. But as time goes on, they start to realize that they're starting to have feelings for each other. They're kind of scared of these feelings. You know, Japan isn't exactly the most progressive country in terms of homosexual rights. So they're confused. They know that society would kind of look down upon them if they revealed, you know, what attraction they had. They're scared. They're actually scared of letting people know that they're in love. So I think it's a fantastically done romantic story. In that same vein, I'd say, of forbidden love as, you know, Brokeback Mountain. So I'm really looking forward to checking it out again. It's been a little while since I read it. So it's approximately, it's a little over, I should say, 11.5 hours since the beginning of the 12-hour one. I know that Girlfriends took me a while to read, but to be fair, they're not tiny books. They're pretty chunky. And I also had dinner. Back to Girlfriends. Does it hold up? It's been a while since I read it, and the answer definitely is yes. It is fantastic. Really, really powerful story of love. And I guess the fear that goes hand in hand with love. Really good characters in general, fantastic artwork. And there's some things I picked up on since last time I read it, which I thought was very interesting. One was Ako. she is trying to get advice from a friend. And what's funny is that the idea of going out with a girl hadn't even crossed her mind. Which I was thinking was rather interesting. I'm just wondering how, like, I mean, I know Japan isn't that progressive in terms of homosexuality, but is it a case where the young people there really don't, like, it doesn't even cross their mind that you can actually go out with someone of the same gender? Another thing I picked up on, which, when I first read this, I wasn't really aware of what demographic was aimed at. I kind of assumed it was shoujo. But since then, since I've read it the first time, I learned it was actually seinen, aimed at adult men. And having reread this now, it's actually really clear, because even before, you know, they get onto the whole, you know, yuri elements, there's a lot of showing off, like, cleavage and, you know, bottom and all that, which I didn't really take note of the first time. I just thought it was like girls being girls, you know, like changing clothes and all that. But now I can actually tell that it's, like, meant to be titillating, meant to be semi-erotic, which, you know, I wouldn't say it ruins it at all. I wouldn't say I let it detract from it. It's just something that I picked up on that I wasn't really aware of. I'm a little tired, as you probably picked up from my voice, lacking a bit on energy. I know there's a bit of extra time, just like before, but I'm going to just kind of leave it here. I'm just going to end off on just kind of a summary of, you know, what I've read, what my opinions are on them, in order. And also, one in particular I want to cover, which my opinion has changed slightly since I read it. Let's start off. Vinland Saga, I enjoyed it. It's the best of the manga I have no interest in reading that I've read. Did it blow me away now? Did I have enough of my interest that I'm considering continuing on with it? Sure, why not? I'll definitely consider continuing on with it. I'll just have to see. Then I believe the next one I read was Enclosed Called Fat, which I would have to say, with the obvious exception of Girlfriends, Enclosed Called Fat I enjoyed the most. I really liked the artwork and the actual story and ideas. I can't say I love the characters, because the characters in this are venomous. Like, they are mostly unlikable. But that didn't prevent me from, you know, enjoying this manga. That was really good. My favourite, Mayoko Ano, I read after that. I read Alabaster. Alabaster, not as good as I was hoping it would be. I really enjoyed those first few chapters, but you know, I was a bit disappointed with how the story progressed after a while. I thought it became quite convoluted. I love the artwork though in it and the panel arrangement, and there's some really interesting characters and ideas. Actually, one thing I forgot to mention before was that this actually, Alabaster, kind of went hand in hand almost with Enclosed Called Fat, because it's to do with outer beauty versus inner beauty. Like, Alabaster himself opposes what he views as things that have outward beauty but inner ugliness, which is kind of similar to the ideas from Enclosed Called Fat. So it actually went rather well hand in hand with that. A Silent Voice. Now, this is the one I was saying that my opinion has changed a little. I spent a lot of time thinking about this volume here, the first volume, and in particular about the middle part of it that I was confused on. And I've come up with what I consider to be a sufficient logic, reason for the thing that kind of annoyed me before, because I couldn't understand why it happened. But I've come up with a reason now which kind of makes sense. So I do intend to reread this volume in the future, maybe when I pick up more of A Silent Voice. Now, I can't say that I enjoyed it, this first volume. It's rather intense emotionally. I enjoyed the second volume more. Of that, there is no doubt, and I will pick up more of it in the future. Dominion, loved the artwork and the action sequences and the ideas. Not so much the actual execution of it. I thought the execution of it was rather sloppy. Yeah, it wasn't bad. It wasn't great either. You know, it was all right. And finally, as I said, Girlfriends, fantastic. Mwah. So I thank you all for watching this. I Hope you guys enjoyed this and that you guys found this, you know, informative, entertaining, etc., etc. And I can't wait to check out some more of 24-hour manga marathons that you guys will be putting up in a little while. So I'm looking forward to that. So yeah, overall, thanks for watching. Don't forget to comment, rate, subscribe, and bye-bye.